Imagine holding a small booklet that could decide whether you lived or died, not because of what was inside it, but because of what governments believed it represented. During World War II, thousands of Jewish lives were saved by forged passports created in secret. But that remarkable rescue raises an even bigger question. How did a simple travel document become one of the most powerful tools on Earth? In 1941, as Nazi Germany tightened its grip over occupied Poland, Jewish families were rounded up and sent to extermination camps. Yet there was one narrow exception. Jews who held passports from foreign countries were often placed in detention camps instead, where they could potentially be exchanged for Germans being held overseas. It was a tiny loophole in an otherwise brutal system, and one man decided to risk everything to use it. Alexander Lados, a Polish diplomat stationed in Switzerland, began secretly producing forged Latin American passports. Those documents were then smuggled into occupied Poland and handed to Jewish families. They looked like ordinary paper booklets, but for thousands of people, they became the thin line separating life from death. And as extraordinary as that story is, it reveals something even more surprising. Passports themselves are a far more recent invention than most people realize. People have always traveled, but passports weren't always part of the journey. In ancient Egypt, travelers carried letters of safe conduct issued by rulers. During the Han Dynasty in China and later in Tudor England, foreigners were given official travel passes. By the 19th century, poorer migrants heading to the United States often needed health certificates before they could enter. Yet for much of human history, borders were relatively open, and crossing them rarely involved the layers of bureaucracy we now take for granted. Everything changed in 1914. When the First World War erupted, neighboring nations, and their colonies, suddenly became enemies. Governments needed a way to identify who was entering and leaving their territory. Fearing spies, deserters, and wartime infiltration, many European countries established checkpoints at ports and border crossings. Travelers were now expected to present early versions of passports, although there was little consistency. Every country designed its own documents, using different formats and requiring different information. When the war finally ended, many assumed these restrictions would disappear along with the conflict. But peace created a different set of challenges. National security remained a concern. Epidemics still threatened public health. Refugees continued to cross borders in large numbers. Faced with these realities, the newly formed League of Nations met in 1920 and chose not to abolish the passport system after all. Instead, they tried to make it more practical. Countries were encouraged to adopt passports with a standard booklet size and layout, written in both the issuing country's language and French. Even so, every nation still controlled who could enter, what documents were required, and under what conditions. That authority extended to visas, the permissions that determine how long someone may stay in a country and whether they're allowed to work, study, or simply visit. By the time the League of Nations met again in 1926, the conversation had changed. The idea of eliminating passports had largely faded away. What had started as a temporary wartime measure was becoming a permanent feature of international travel, and the foundation of the passport system we know today. But passports soon became more than travel documents. They evolved into instruments of power. Governments didn't just use them to track movement. They used them to decide who belonged, who didn't, and who deserved greater freedom. Across colonial empires, passports reinforced unequal treatment between people born in imperial capitals and those born in colonized territories. During the 1920s, someone born in the United Kingdom could receive a British passport, while someone born in India, despite also being a British subject, could instead be issued a separate British Indian passport. The power of a passport extended beyond international borders. Because governments issue them, governments can also refuse them. In some cases, passports became political tools used to silence opposition or discourage dissent. During the Cold War, the United States revoked the passports of political and civil rights activists, including W.E.B. Du Bois, limiting their ability to travel abroad. As air travel became the dominant way people crossed borders during the second half of the 20th century, passport checks moved into airports. At the same time, advances in digital databases and surveillance technology gave governments an even greater ability to monitor and regulate individual movement. Crossing a border was no longer just about showing a document. it became part of an increasingly sophisticated global system of identification and control. Today, the value of a passport depends heavily on international relationships. Some regions have agreements that make travel remarkably easy. The Schengen Agreement, for example, allows passport-free travel across 29 European countries. Citizens of wealthier nations also tend to enjoy broader travel access, creating a system where opportunity is distributed very unevenly. The contrast is striking. As of 2025, a United States passport allows visa-free access to nearly 180 countries. For a Pakistani passport holder, that number is fewer than 40, and the gap doesn't end there. Even applying for a visa can depend heavily on where you're from. In 2024, Algerian applicants for U.S. visitor visas faced a significantly higher refusal rate than applicants from Brazil. In some parts of the world, wealth can even change the equation entirely. More than a dozen countries offer so-called golden passport programs, granting citizenship, and with it, a new passport, to people who make substantial investments or donations. So today, a passport is far more than proof of identity. It can shape where you work, where you study, where you seek safety, and sometimes, what opportunities you'll ever have. For some people, the world has never been more open. For others, it remains filled with invisible barriers. And that leaves us with a question that's becoming harder to ignore. Should the lines drawn on a map really determine a person's rights, opportunities, and freedom?